The station smelled faintly of rain and burnt coffee. Voices swirled in half-heard sentences, laughter, announcements, the scrape of rolling suitcases over the tiled floor. She stood near platform 6, unmoving, her right hand wrapped around the handle of a small brown suitcase. The leather was scuffed at the edges, the way memories fray after being handled too many times. A red scarf was knotted loosely around her neck, its fabric fluttering each time the doors opened and cold evening winds spilled in. She didn't notice the cold. Her gaze was fixed on a figure at the far end of the crowd. He hadn't changed much. The same careless slouch, the same half-smirk like the world was a joke only he understood. He was leaning against the wall, phone in hand, thumbing through something as if nothing in this place could demand his full attention. She wondered if he even remembered what he'd said to her years ago, the way his voice had sliced clean through her ambition, the way he'd laughed when she told him her dream. People like you don't end up anywhere worth talking about. The words had nested in her chest for years, sharp as glass. She shifted her weight, feeling the scarf slide against her collarbone. Somewhere behind her, a train screeched in protest as it slowed. Her pulse matched its rhythm, fast, uneven, urgent. She thought about walking over. Thought about saying his name. But instead, she watched. She wanted him to look up first. Her fingers trembled against the suitcase handle, not from fear, but from the weight of what she carried, not just the clothes inside, but the quiet truth that would change everything. The PA system crackled. Someone's phone rang. A woman laughed too loudly. The moment stretched, long enough for her to notice small things, how the wind lifted the ends of his hair, how his shoes were worn at the heel, how the shadows from the overhead lights cut his face into two halves. He still didn't see her. She adjusted the scarf again, her fingertips grazing the fabric like it might steady her. The red was bright against the dull colors of the station, like something alive refusing to fade. Her train would leave soon. His wouldn't. They were headed in different directions, at least for now. She took one step toward him, then stopped. Not yet. The suitcase shifted in her grip. Somewhere inside, beneath folded sweaters and old letters, the envelope waited, the deed to a house with peeling white paint and a rusted swing set in the yard. His house. Her house now. The scarf lifted again in the wind, and she turned away before he ever looked up. The train doors slid shut behind her, sealing in the scent of wet metal and stranger's perfume. She found a seat by the window, the suitcase pressed against her knees, the red scarf coiled loosely in her lap. Outside, the station blurred as the train began to crawl forward. For a moment, her reflection floated over the passing lights, her eyes, darker than she remembered, her hair still wind-tousled. She traced a fingertip over the edge of the scarf, as if the fabric might answer the questions she never asked out loud. It had been her father's. Not the scarf, but the habit of keeping something red close when traveling. It keeps you visible in a crowd, he once told her when she was 7, holding her tiny hand in a bustling bazaar. Back then, she had carried a small fabric bag embroidered with faded roses. She'd thought it made her look important, like a person who had somewhere to be. But importance was a luxury. The years that followed had been nothing but thin budgets and long nights, shifting between cheap apartments and borrowed couches. She'd learned to stretch instant noodles into 2 meals, to work 3 jobs without ever letting anyone see her knees shake from exhaustion. And still, she had never stopped thinking about that house. His house. The one with chipped blue shutters and the swing set that groaned in the wind. He had once told her that people like him were meant to own homes like that, while people like her were meant to serve coffee to those who did. She bit down on the memory until her jaw ached. A shadow flickered in the corner of her eye. She looked up. Across the aisle, a man in a gray coat sat angled slightly toward her, pretending to read a newspaper. His eyes lifted only once, quick and deliberate, before dropping back to the page. Not the man from the station, someone else. His silence was different. Watchful. Intentional. She shifted her gaze to the window again, watching families on the platform greet one another with wide arms and wet cheeks. No one was waiting for her. No one had been waiting for a long time. The scarf slipped from her lap, pooling on the floor. She bent to retrieve it, her fingertips brushing over the weave, the fabric now carrying both her father's words and her own quiet defiance. When she looked up, the man in the gray coat was still watching her. This time, he didn't look away. The train slowed unexpectedly, jerking forward again. Her grip tightened on the suitcase handle. She should have turned away, should have let the moment pass, but instead, she held his gaze. The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, not quite a warning. She hesitated. And for the first time in years, she wondered if she was being followed. The train's rhythm had settled into a low, steady hum, the kind that made thoughts louder than they should be. Outside, the sky pressed low and heavy, swollen with clouds. The glass reflected her face and his in uneven fragments whenever the lights in the tunnel flickered past. He was still there, gray coat, paper folded neatly in his lap now. One of his shoes was scuffed at the toe, the leather cracked just enough to show the years it had endured. Not the kind of shoes someone bought for style. The kind you kept because they'd walked you through too much to be discarded. When he leaned forward to adjust his coat, his wallet slipped slightly from the pocket. A small photograph peeked out, edges curled, colors faded. She only caught a glimpse, but it was enough. A woman in a sundress, hair blown across her smile, standing in front of what looked like a dilapidated porch. Her pulse stuttered. She knew that porch. She tore her gaze away, forcing herself to stare at the raindrops beginning to smear the window, each one pulling the world outside into streaks of gray and silver. The house was everywhere lately, on deeds, in dreams, in the scent of rusted metal on rainy days. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the distance, and the train lights flickered once. The sound rattled in her chest, and she felt the old ache of being caught between running towards something and running from it. She needed to leave. Needed to reach her stop, sign the papers, close the door on everything that had kept her small. But his presence, it was like a thread catching on the edge of her scarf, pulling her backward. Why was he watching her? Why did she not want to break the gaze? The rain thickened, each drop hitting the glass with the insistence of questions she couldn't answer. He tilted his head slightly, the way people do when they're memorizing something. She realized her hands were clenched tight around the suitcase handle. The memory of her father's voice came uninvited. Sometimes, the ones who see you aren't the ones you ask to look. She looked back at him fully now. The air between them felt charged, though neither moved. His expression didn't give her answers, just a calm that almost felt rehearsed. The train lurched again, slowing. Her stop was next. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Be careful getting off in the rain," he said. It wasn't a warning. But it wasn't casual either. The doors would open soon. She couldn't tell if she wanted him to follow, or feared he already would. The platform was slick with rain, each step echoing sharper than it should. The air smelled of iron and damp concrete, the kind that clings to clothes long after you've left. She moved quickly, the small suitcase bumping against her leg with every stride. Her stop. Her escape. But just as she reached the exit, she glanced back, once. The crowd thinned in patches, revealing him through shifting umbrellas and hunched coats. He was standing under the awning, rain dripping steadily from the brim. And in his hand, unmistakable against the dull gray world, was the red scarf. Her breath caught. She touched her neck instinctively, it was gone. Somewhere between the train and here, she must have dropped it. And he had picked it up. For a moment, neither moved. Rain pooled around his shoes, soaking the frayed leather. A woman passing between them glanced from his hand to her, lips pressing into a knowing, almost pitying smile. The judgment was quiet but sharp, like the world had decided on a story for them without asking. She took a step forward, then stopped. Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence. The thought whispered through her chest, warm and cold at once. He began walking toward her, not fast, not hesitant, just certain. She could have turned away. Could have melted into the crowd, vanished into the wet streets. But she stayed rooted. When he reached her, he held out the scarf, the rain making the red look darker, deeper. "You dropped this," he said, voice almost drowned by the patter of water on the station roof. Her fingers brushed his as she took it back. The touch was brief, but it left a trail of heat like the ghost of something unfinished. She wanted to ask why he kept watching her. She wanted to tell him to stop. She wanted both things at once. Behind them, a young couple dashed past, laughing under a shared umbrella, their joy careless and loud. The girl felt her throat tighten, not with jealousy, but with the ache of remembering what it felt like to be that unguarded. He stepped back slightly, eyes still fixed on hers. "You're not from here," he said quietly. Not a question. "And you are?" she asked, the words heavier than she intended. A faint smile. No answer. The rain slowed, but the air stayed thick. Somewhere, a train horn cried in the distance, long and low. She turned slightly toward the street, then paused, half in retreat, half in surrender. Neither of them moved again. The cafe near the station was warm, smelling faintly of cinnamon and burnt toast. She sat in the far corner, red scarf folded neatly beside her cup, steam from the coffee blurring the rain-slicked view outside. She had almost convinced herself to forget him, just another stranger in a city full of them, when the news on the mounted TV caught her attention. The headline scrolled lazily, "Local development firm acquires historic properties." Her stomach tightened as the camera cut to an image of the man in the gray coat, no scarf now, just a sharp black suit, shaking hands in a glass conference room. Beneath his name, the title read, CEO, Ellington and Company. Her breath stuck. That was the company she had just applied to 2 weeks ago, desperate for work that paid more than rent. The scarf suddenly felt heavier on the table. She reached for it without thinking, fingers tracing the damp weave. And that's when she noticed it, stitched into the corner, almost invisible in the fraying thread, a name. Not hers. Anna. A sound rose in her ears, like distant waves crashing. She remembered the photograph she had seen peeking from his wallet. The woman in the sundress. The porch. The smile. The waitress passed by, humming softly, and her voice tangled with the memory of his words, "Be careful getting off in the rain." Only now, they didn't sound like casual concern, they sounded like someone who knew exactly what storms could take from you. She thought of her father's phrase, the one that had carried her this far: "Sometimes, the ones who see you aren't the ones you ask to look." But this time, the echo felt sharper, as if seeing came with a cost. Her phone buzzed. An email. She opened it with stiff fingers. Subject, interview confirmation from HR, Ellington and Company. Message, "We are pleased to invite you for an in-person interview tomorrow, 9 a.m. Location, Ellington Headquarters, Conference Room 4B. The screen blurred. She wasn't sure if it was the coffee steam or her own unsteady breath. Point of no return. She could decline. Pretend she never saw the news. Pretend the scarf was just cloth, not a thread pulling her into something bigger than she understood. But instead, she slipped it around her neck again, knotting it tighter this time. The rain had stopped when she stepped outside, but the streets still glistened like glass. Tomorrow morning, she would walk into his building. His world. And whether he recognized her or not, she knew one thing: nothing would be the same when she walked out. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and strong coffee. Rain tapped the floor-to-ceiling windows in slow, deliberate beats, as if the storm outside was waiting for its cue. She stood near the head of the table, scarf wound tightly at her throat. The glass door slid open behind her, and his reflection appeared first, taller in this light, his gray coat replaced by the same black suit from the news clip. He didn't sit. Instead, he placed a thin folder on the table and opened it with deliberate care. "Your application," he said, voice even. "You're qualified. More than qualified." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Then why the interview? He studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because sometimes, the ones who see you, his eyes flicked to the scarf. Aren't the ones you asked to look. The words hit her like cold water. Her father's phrase, echoed, owned now by someone else. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Anna, he said quietly. That was my daughter's name. She wore that scarf the winter before his voice thinned, like it had to pass through too many unspoken things. Before the porch rotted away and the swing set rusted. I thought I'd lost it for good. The room seemed smaller, heavier. She wanted to loosen the knot at her neck but couldn't move. Why me? She asked, the words trembling despite herself. Because you remind me of her, he said simply. Not because of your work, or your history. Because of the way you don't let go of things, even when you should. Her breath caught. It wasn't love. It wasn't even about her. It was about the echo of someone else. He slid the folder toward her. The job is yours. If you want it. She stared at the folder, her reflection faint in its glossy cover. She could take it, step into the security she'd fought for, claim a small victory over the man who once mocked her dreams. But something in her shifted. Her gaze drifted to the scarf. She unknotted it slowly, the fabric warm from her skin. Stepping forward, she placed it on the table between them. It's not mine to keep, she said. His jaw tightened, but he didn't stop her. Outside, the rain eased, revealing a city washed clean. She turned toward the door, suitcase waiting in the corner. As she gripped the handle, she realized this was the same moment as the station days ago, but reversed. This time, she was the one walking away without looking back. In the glass, she caught his faint reflection, standing still, the scarf in his hands, head bowed. She stepped into the hallway, the air cooler, the hum of distant phones and footsteps swallowing her. Not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever. The streets were drying, their puddles holding fractured pieces of the fading sky. She walked slowly, not because she was tired, but because there was no longer a need to rush. The suitcase was lighter now, not in weight, but in meaning. Passing a bookstore, she caught her reflection in the glass. Hair a little damp, eyes steady. There was something unfamiliar in her face, something quietly unafraid. By the time she reached her apartment, the evening light had turned gold, slipping in through the thin curtains. She set the suitcase by the wall and crossed to the small wooden table near the window. The scarf was not there. Its absence was not loss, it was release. She opened the top drawer and took out a folded piece of paper, the interview confirmation email she had printed days ago. She read it once more, not as an opportunity, but as a reminder of what she'd chosen to walk away from. Carefully, she slid it back into the drawer. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. She didn't answer. Instead, she poured herself tea, letting the steam rise into her face. Sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition. The words floated in, uninvited but warm. She wasn't sure if they were her father's, his, or her own. Maybe they belonged to everyone who had ever been seen without being claimed. Outside, a child ran past with a red balloon, the string trailing dangerously close to the ground. She watched it bob in the wind until they disappeared around the corner. Her apartment felt smaller now, but in a good way, like a space you could finally inhabit without holding your breath. The city noises outside were less like intrusions and more like proof she wasn't alone in the world. She thought of him, not with longing, not with anger, but with a strange gratitude. He had given her nothing tangible, yet somehow left her with a different map of herself. The tea cooled. The light dimmed. She sat by the window until the streetlights flickered on, their halos trembling in the thin mist that still clung to the air. Maybe she would take another train soon. Maybe she would leave this city altogether. Or maybe she would stay, letting the days come without forcing them into shape. There are people who arrive like storms and leave like seasons, quietly, inevitably, and with traces you only notice long after. She didn't know yet which he was. But she knew this, not every ending is meant to close. Some are meant to stay slightly open, just enough for the wind to find you again.